Hello folks, this is David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com, your pub chess bluffer, talking to you on Friday the 28th of June 2019 about a game that was played at a chess party I attended last night, hosted by my man over here, Dr. M, with a couple of other guys colleagues and friends of mine. We played chess for about 3.5 hours or so. In a convivial atmosphere, chatting away, background music, often being commented on more than we were paying attention to chess. But anyway, we got a few games in, and tonight I want to look at a game that was played between Dr. M and my man here, Felix, in which Dr. M was white and opened with e4, and Felix responded with b6. Now, this is not such a common way to respond to white, but as you can see, it goes by the name of the Owen Defence, and it was used back in the 19th century by a strong English player whose name was indeed Owen, in which he aims to fianchetto the black bishop on b7 and attack the center from there. However, there is a downside, according to Wikipedia, to this approach by black in response to e4. It says here, 1b6 does not prepare for castling on the king side, as 1g6 does. If you open with 1g6, you put your f bishop over here on g7, and it gets you one step closer to kingside castling. And also it is harder for black to augment his pressure against the center with f5, apparently, which weakens the king side. So, in short, it's not a highly recommended opening. It says here, Owen's Defence has a dubious reputation, but it is often used because, or it's often played because players nowadays are not familiar with this opening, with this response. So it can be a good way to approach. It can be a good way to force white to think for himself rather than rely on theoretical lines that he may have learnt by heart. So from the start, we have to think for ourselves in most cases when facing this opening, unless you want to pop over to Wikipedia and have a look at the ins and outs of the opening to prepare against this kind of thing. How did the game progress? Well, the opening, I would say, went to Dr. M, who opens strong with e4, d4. And here we have the fianchettoed bishop, and then knight is developed. And here's the the e6 move, which is a signature move in this Owen Defence. And then we have the second knight. So we have a nice bit of development here, followed by a quick break of the d pawn into the center, d5. You can see here that white's advantage is building up. The light chess is recommending that white take this pawn or develop bishop out here, getting that quick check. What in fact white did in our game was to advance the pawn. Now the advantage is retained, and one way of thinking about this is that it locks the center against the fianchettoed bishop here. So the bishop is kind of stuck there. However, things took a rather strange turn, I felt, because having developed the bishop here, a second move of the bishop to bring him out here merely to exchange off bishops seemed a bit strange to me when we've got this corner here still undeveloped. And indeed, Dr. M moved his bishop up the diagonal, and I was expecting to see a straight exchange, but in fact he checked black's king, and so the swap off took place here. But it did enable white to advance his knight. However, there was an instant response and the knight retreated. So on the other hand, this fianchettoed bishop has now been removed, so you have to wonder about what the point of it was in the first place. I shall have to talk to my man Felix about that. How did things progress from here? We're back to equality. And yes, this is a mistake. Leicester does not like this move at all. And I think we can see why. If you look at the board, you have now a massive central weakness. This is now a very weak pawn. So white should perhaps be thinking of ways of attacking this pawn. But what happened actually was advantage was not taken here. There's a couple of moves being recommended. The move of the rook into the center, centralizing the rook in front of the king, eyeing that pawn there. This does seem to be a nice timely move of the rook. Get that rook in there, looking at the pawn and through the pawn at the king, which is solidly stuck in the center. There's also building up an advance on the queen's side with this little move here. But on this theme of a weak e-pawn, at some stage we might want to move our knight also. If we can get rid of that pawn there, move the knight over here to attack that square as well. Of course, the white squared bishop's been swapped off now, so that works to some degree in favor or to the help of this pawn here, as there is no white squared bishop to support that attack. But none of this happened in the game because what we had, let's just get rid of all this. What we had was instead this rather questionable move here. Actually, interestingly, the advantage is maintained by white, but it's a gift to black. You can see Leicester is recommending it's recommended one of two moves: to take the e pawn, or to take this gift over here. But in the haste of the game, bearing in mind this is a social game, lots of chatter was going on at the same time, and we were also playing with, I think this was either a 20 or 30-minute game, I forget. Each side had either 20 or 30 minutes on the clock. Now, this move of the queen, actually, although the advantage is building up here, this is actually quite a decisive move later on in the game. This is a well-placed queen. Because white did not cash in on his advantage at all in this game. But he does keep, he gets his pawn out of immediate trouble here. Black takes, we get this exchange here. And yes, this would have been a nice move. Get the bishop out, pinning the knight to the queen to counter this diagonal threat here. But that is not what happens. We continue ploughing along, which I think has brought black a slight material advantage. Black has 2, 4, 6, 7 pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, black gained that pawn in the central exchange, and black's problems have pretty much been solved now. There's equality at this stage in the game. I mean, white can pop in there and grab that pawn, and would probably lose the knight down here. So white does the wiser thing, recommended by Leicester: protect the knight, get your bishop onto a nice diagonal. Yeah, so now we see this doubling here. Now, when you see this doubling of bishop and queen, it's a good idea to think about what it means. There's a very strong barrage coming down onto this weakly defended H pawn. This doubling should be a pretty big foghorn of a warning sound to the white player. You've got your queen and you've got the black queen and the black bishop working together in the center of the board. Where could they possibly go? It looks like they could come down here, but this was not noticed by white, which leads to disaster. Right now, it's a well-balanced game, and as you can see, there's a perfectly good response to this move. and the response is to advance the f-pawn protected by the rook here. But white was looking at the queen and wanted merely to threaten the queen, and this leads to disaster. This rook move is several moves too late. We saw it recommended three or so moves back. It's a good place for the rook, but not now. It's not timely at all, because the queen simply picks up that pawn, checks the king, forces the king. There's only one possible move here, and now the queen can get in another check. Felix thought about this for a while, but it was the right decision, because it forces the king out in front of the rook. So this pawn, this pawn is still pretty weak. Had this rook been here a while earlier, and had something been done to prevent this free pawn grab down here by the queen, the rook would be in a very nice threatening position. But timing is almost everything in chess. So now the queen gets in a series of moves. Even here, although things are very bad, there is some salvage work that can be done, but unfortunately white did not make the best defensive moves here. What we have recommended is either f3 or get the king back down here onto this f square. This is the main direction for the king to head in. There is one alternative a bit later, but getting the king back on this side is where it needs to be. Don't forget that white squared bishops have gone. There's no white squared bishops, so a king is somewhat safer on the white squares. Not safe, but somewhat safer. If the king comes down here, all the queen has is this check down here again. So it would at least stave off the endless checks, and also there's a threat of queen takes queen. But what we had instead was the second best move, f3, and although it's not the recommended move, black continued checking, which in fact at this level I think was probably was a good idea, because it's not the ideal move, but on the other hand, the opponent is also not likely to make an ideal move. And as you can see, the ideal move for white in a bad situation is to get back down to this, again, this safe square down here, f3. Because now if the king is on f3, the king cannot be checked once again. The king cannot be checked, and also the rook will be threatening the queen. This square up here is an interesting alternative that I hadn't looked at, but by moving the king forward, and again on this white square, the queen cannot come in here and check. So this is an interesting alternative. I personally would favor coming back down here, but of those two optimal squares, neither was taken. You see what happens to the advantage bar. This is game lost. The game is lost at this point. The king steps onto a black square. You've got the black squared bishop. You've got the queen on a black square. All the queen has to do is put in another check. Looking at gobbling up another pawn. Even here, the king, you see the king, light chess is recommending these white squares. Get onto a white square. This one here would probably be the better. However, what happens is this is fatal. You see, it's game over, practically game over. Blocking with the rook is a terrible idea, because the bishop can come in, and that's the king, the rook pinned to the king. I was writing down the notes, and so I was kind of just glancing at the board, and to me this was the obvious move, and I hadn't noticed what Felix saw and went for was this move here. So we get this move, it's pretty much game over. The rook and the knight are forked. And so this is desperado land. We can go either way. This is as far as my notation went. I can't remember which way round Felix did it, but it's game over. Either way, you take the rook with the pawn and say check. And if the king takes, then you just take the pawn with either the queen or the bishop, quite possibly the queen in this situation. Or you take the pawn first and you're pinning the rook to the king, who can then be dispatched either by the bishop or rather nicely by the pawn, which will then give access to this file for the A8 rook. So there we are. You see something. What's going on here? That was not a move that was played. So you either take this pawn or you take the rook right now to attack the king, and it is game over. Okay, Mark, that is a bit of basic analysis of the game, and also a way for both Dr. M and Felix to have a look at how their game went and compare their moves with what is recommended by Lichess. Hope you enjoyed that. More are to come. More chess videos are on their way from the Pub Chess Bluffer to help anybody who's a casual player looking for a few tips to improve their games. Okay, folks, that's all from me. Until next time.